They bred him to kill in the bloodiest fighting pits. But one sheriff saw something different in those scarred eyes.
From fighting dog to lawman's deputy, this transformation shocked everyone in the Wild West. The town of Copper Ridge sat in Nevada Territory in 1881. It was a rough mining town where fortunes were made and lost. Saloons lined the main street doing business day and night. Miners came to drink away their sorrows or celebrate their luck. But underneath the town's surface, darker business thrived in shadows. Behind the Lucky Star Saloon, a fighting pit operated every Saturday night. Men bet fortunes on brutal dogfights that lasted until death. The pit owner was a man named Cole, who bred dogs for killing. He made more money in one night than most miners made in months. The town knew about the fighting pit, but nobody stopped it. Sheriff William had only been in town for 3 months. He was trying to clean up Copper Ridge, one crime at a time, but the fighting pit was protected by powerful men with money. Will knew he had to be careful about how he approached this. One wrong move could end his career or his life quickly.
In a cage behind the fighting pit lived a dog named Duke. He was a pit bull mix with a brindle coat and white chest. His face was covered in scars from countless brutal fights over years. His ears were torn from teeth and claws of other dogs. Duke had been fighting since he was barely a year old. Cole had bought him from a breeder who specialized in fighting dogs. For 3 years, Duke had fought every week without losing once. He was Cole's champion and most profitable fighter in the entire territory. But Duke didn't fight because he enjoyed it at all. He fought because it was the only way to survive each week. The dogs who lost were killed immediately after the fight ended. Duke had learned to kill quickly, to end the suffering faster. He hated every moment of the violence and bloodshed he caused. But his survival instinct was stronger than his gentle nature buried deep. Between fights, Duke lived in a small cage, barely big enough to stand. He was fed just enough to keep him strong for fighting. He was never shown kindness or compassion from anyone around him. Cole beat him regularly to keep him aggressive and mean. Duke's amber eyes had lost hope long ago in this terrible life. One Saturday night, Sheriff Will was walking past the Lucky Star Saloon. He heard the roar of a crowd coming from behind the building. He knew what was happening back there in that hidden pit. Will had been gathering evidence for weeks to shut it down, but he needed witnesses willing to testify against Cole and his operation. Most people were too afraid to speak up against him openly. Will decided to investigate more closely tonight, despite the danger involved. He walked around to the back alley, carefully and quietly. The sounds of the crowd grew louder as he approached slowly. Men were shouting and placing bets on the current fight happening. Will peered around a corner and saw the fighting pit clearly. 2 dogs were locked in brutal combat, while men cheered loudly. Blood stained the dirt floor of the pit below them. Will felt sick watching the violence, but he needed evidence first. Then he saw Cole standing at the edge of the pit. Cole was laughing and counting money from the betting proceeds. The fight ended quickly when one dog went down permanently. The crowd erupted in cheers and groans, depending on their bets. Cole's men dragged the dead dog out of the pit carelessly. Then Cole shouted to the crowd gathered around him excitedly, "Bring out the champion! Duke hasn't lost in 3 years straight!" The crowd roared with anticipation and excitement building fast. Will watched as a cage was brought out from a shed. Inside was Duke, the brindle pit bull with the scarred face. Even from this distance, Will could see the dog's muscular, powerful build. But he could also see something else in Duke's eyes. Not the rage or bloodlust you would expect from a champion, but a deep sadness and resignation to his terrible fate. Duke was led into the pit on a heavy chain. Another dog was brought in from the opposite side aggressively. The crowd placed their bets rapidly as the fight was about to begin.
Will watched Duke closely as the handlers prepared to release both dogs. The fight began with brutal intensity immediately as handlers released both dogs. The other dog attacked Duke with savage aggression and fury, but Duke defended himself with practiced efficiency and skill honed over years. Will noticed something unusual about how Duke fought compared to others. Duke didn't attack unless necessary to defend himself from harm. He seemed to be trying to end the fight as quickly and mercifully as possible. Within minutes, Duke had won the fight decisively and completely. The crowd erupted in cheers for their champion once again tonight. But Will saw Duke's eyes after the fight ended finally. The dog looked exhausted and deeply sad about what he'd done. Cole grabbed Duke roughly by the chain attached to his collar. "That's my champion," he shouted to the crowd proudly, "undefeated and unbeatable in this territory." Will had seen enough evidence for tonight's investigation, but something else had happened during his observation time here. He had seen something in Duke that nobody else seemed to notice, a soul that was broken but not destroyed completely by this life. The next morning, Will went to speak with Rachel at the Lucky Star. Rachel owned the saloon, but she hated the fighting pit operation. She had tried to get Cole to stop using her property, but Cole paid her too much money to refuse his business. "Rachel, I need your help with something important," Will said seriously. Rachel poured him coffee and sat down at the table. "If this is about the fighting pit, I can't help you," she said. "Cole will ruin me if I testify against him publicly." Will nodded, understanding her position completely. "I'm not asking you to testify in court yet," he said. "I just need information about Cole's operation and his dogs." Rachel looked around to make sure nobody was listening closely. "What do you want to know specifically?" she asked quietly. "The champion dog, Duke. What happens to him between the Saturday night fights?" Rachel's face softened with obvious sympathy and sadness. "That poor animal lives in a cage out back," she explained. "Cole beats him to keep him mean and aggressive for fighting." Will felt anger rising in his chest at this information. "Does anyone ever show that dog any kindness at all?" he asked. Rachel shook her head slowly, with genuine sadness showing. "Nobody dares to go near him. Cole says he's too dangerous and will attack anyone approaching." But Will had seen something different in Duke's eyes last night. He had seen intelligence and sadness, not mindless aggression or violence. "I want to meet Duke," Will said suddenly, with determination building. Rachel's eyes widened with surprise and concern for him. "Sheriff, that's dangerous. Cole won't allow it and the dog might attack." But Will was already standing up from the table ready. "I've dealt with dangerous things before in my career," he said. "I just need to see something for myself about this dog." Rachel sighed, knowing she couldn't stop the determined sheriff now. "Come back tonight after Cole leaves," she said finally. "I'll let you see Duke then. But be careful, Will." That evening, Will returned to the Lucky Star Saloon as planned. Rachel was waiting for him near the back door, nervously. "Cole left about an hour ago," she whispered to him. "But be very careful, Sheriff. That dog has killed before." Will nodded and followed her out to the back area quietly. The fighting pit was empty now, stained with dried blood from fights. Behind a wooden shed sat a metal cage in the shadows. Inside the cage, Duke lay curled up on bare ground without comfort. His brindle coat was dirty, and his scars looked even worse up close. Will approached slowly and carefully, making no sudden movements at all. Duke's head lifted immediately, and his amber eyes fixed on Will. The dog's body tensed, ready to defend himself if needed.
But Will noticed something. Duke didn't growl or show his teeth threateningly. He just watched and waited to see what would happen next. "Easy, boy," Will said softly in a calm, gentle voice. "I'm not here to hurt you at all." Duke's ears twitched slightly at the gentle tone of voice.
Will knelt down about 6 feet from the cage entrance, carefully. He wanted to be at Duke's level, not towering over him. "I saw you fight last night," Will continued, speaking softly. "You're very strong and skilled, but I also saw something else." Duke continued watching him with those intense amber eyes burning bright. "I saw that you don't want to fight," Will said. "I saw sadness in your eyes after you won the match." For the first time, Duke's rigid posture relaxed slightly at these words. Nobody had ever spoken to him like this before in his life. Nobody had ever tried to understand what he was feeling inside. Will slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out some dried beef. He had brought it specifically for this meeting tonight. "Are you hungry, boy?" Will asked while holding out the meat. Duke's nose twitched as he smelled the food offering, but he didn't move toward it immediately, with suspicion. He had learned that kindness was often a trick in his world. Will tossed the piece of beef gently toward the cage entrance. The meat landed just inside the cage near Duke's front paws. Duke looked down at it and back up at Will carefully. He was trying to understand what this human wanted from him. Will just sat quietly, making no demands or threatening movements at all. After a long moment, Duke lowered his head and ate the beef. It was the first kind gesture he had received in 3 years. Will smiled slightly at this small victory of trust beginning. "That's a good boy," he said encouragingly and warmly. "You deserve kindness, not beatings and violence." Duke finished eating and looked at Will again with different eyes now. There was a spark of something that had been buried deep. Hope, maybe, or curiosity about this strange, gentle human before him. Will spent the next hour sitting near the cage, just talking. He told Duke about his own life and his plans for the town. He talked about anything and everything that came to mind naturally. And Duke listened to every word, his head tilted slightly in attention.
Rachel watched from the doorway with amazement and growing surprise. "I've never seen Duke act so calm before," she whispered. "He's usually aggressive and on edge constantly." Will stood up slowly after the hour passed. "He's not naturally aggressive, Rachel," he said. "He's been forced to be that way to survive here." Will looked at Duke one more time before leaving tonight. "I'll be back tomorrow, boy," he promised the scarred dog. "And I'm going to get you out of here somehow." Duke's tail moved slightly, just a tiny wag of acknowledgement. It was the first time in 3 years Duke had wagged his tail. Rachel saw it and put her hand over her mouth in shock. "Sheriff, what are you planning to do?" she asked with concern. Will's jaw was set with determination and resolve burning. "I'm going to shut down this fighting pit permanently," he said, "and I'm going to save that dog from this hell." Over the next 2 weeks, Will visited Duke every single night, faithfully. Each visit, he brought food and just sat talking to Duke. Duke began to look forward to these visits with growing anticipation. His aggressive demeanor melted away slowly in Will's presence completely. Will could see the real dog emerging from beneath the fighter. Duke was intelligent, loyal, and desperately wanted affection and purpose. On the 15th night, Will did something bold and risky. He opened the cage door slowly while Duke watched him carefully. "Come on out, boy," Will said gently. "Let's see if you trust me enough." Duke hesitated at the open door before him, uncertainly. This could be another trick to test him for punishment. But something in Will's eyes told Duke this was real. Duke slowly walked out of the cage for the first time freely. He stood in front of Will, trembling slightly with fear and hope.
Will slowly extended his hand toward Duke's scarred head gently. Duke sniffed Will's hand carefully, processing this moment of decision. Then, slowly, Duke allowed Will to touch his head softly. Will gently petted Duke's scarred head and torn ears with compassion. "Good boy," Will said, with emotion in his voice now. "You're a good boy, Duke, not a monster." Duke's tail began to wag faster with genuine happiness emerging. For the first time in 3 years, Duke felt safe. Rachel watched this moment with tears streaming down her face. "I can't believe what I'm seeing right now," she said. "That dog was considered completely vicious and beyond saving." Will continued petting Duke, building trust and connection between them. "Every soul deserves a second chance, Rachel," he said, "even ones that society has written off completely." But their moment was interrupted by a harsh voice suddenly. "What the hell is going on here?" Cole shouted angrily. He had returned unexpectedly early and saw everything happening. Cole stormed toward them with fury burning in his eyes. "Get away from my champion fighter, Sheriff!" he screamed. Duke immediately positioned himself between Will and Cole protectively. The gentle dog from moments ago transformed into a protective guardian. His scarred body tensed and a low growl rumbled. But Duke wasn't protecting himself anymore from harm. He was protecting Will, the first human to show him kindness. Cole stopped when he saw Duke's protective stance clearly. "That dog is mine, legally," Cole said with menace. "You have no right to touch my property, Sheriff." Will stood up slowly, his hand near his gun. "That dog is evidence in an illegal fighting operation," he said. "And as of tonight, this pit is shut down permanently." Cole laughed harshly at this bold statement. "You can't shut me down. I have powerful friends protecting me." Will smiled slightly, with confidence building. "Not anymore, you don't." Will pulled out papers from his vest pocket carefully. "I have signed statements from 20 witnesses about your operation," he said, "including detailed records of illegal gambling and animal cruelty." Cole's face turned red with rage at this revelation. "Those witnesses won't testify when they see what happens to them," he threatened. But Will wasn't intimidated by these empty threats anymore. "They already testified to the federal marshal yesterday afternoon," Will explained. "Your protection just disappeared completely, Cole." Rachel stepped forward from the doorway with courage building. "And I'm testifying too," she announced firmly and clearly. "I'm done being afraid of you, Cole." Cole looked around and realized he was trapped, finally. "That dog is still mine," he said desperately. "You can't take my champion fighter away from me." Will looked at Duke standing protectively beside him loyally. "This dog isn't a fighter anymore," Will said. "He's going to be something much better than that." Cole was arrested that night and taken to jail in chains. The fighting pit was shut down permanently by federal order. All of Cole's dogs were seized as evidence of animal cruelty, but Will made a special request to the federal marshal visiting. "I want to take custody of Duke personally," he said. "I believe he can be rehabilitated and serve a better purpose." The marshal looked at the scarred pit bull with skepticism clearly. "Sheriff, that dog has killed other dogs in brutal fights," he said. "Are you sure you want that responsibility and risk?" Will looked at Duke sitting calmly beside him, waiting patiently. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," he answered. The marshal signed the papers, giving Will custody of Duke. "If that dog attacks anyone, it's on you," he warned seriously. Will nodded, accepting that responsibility without hesitation or doubt. Duke was officially his dog now, and under his protection. Will led Duke away from the fighting pit for the last time. Duke walked beside Will without a leash or chain needed. The dog who had been forced to kill now walked peacefully. The first few weeks were challenging for both Will and Duke. Duke had to learn how to live without violence and fear. He flinched at sudden movements, expecting punishment that never came. Will was patient and gentle, teaching Duke that life could be different. He gave Duke a bed in his office at the jail. He fed him regular meals with care and love. He talked to Duke constantly, building trust deeper every single day. Duke's aggressive exterior continued to melt away steadily and surely. The intelligent, loyal dog beneath the scars emerged more each day. Will began training Duke in basic commands with positive reinforcement. Duke learned quickly, eager to please the man who saved him. Sit, stay, come, heel, Duke mastered them all within weeks. But Will had a bigger vision for Duke than just a pat. He saw potential in Duke that nobody else could see yet. One day, Will brought Duke to the town square deliberately. People stopped and stared at the scarred fighting dog walking calmly. Many townsfolk were afraid and moved away quickly from them both. "Sheriff, why did you bring that dangerous dog here?" someone shouted. Will stopped in the middle of the square confidently and proudly. "This is Duke," he announced loudly to everyone gathered around. He was forced to fight in Cole's pit for years against his will. The crowd murmured with recognition and some fear still present. "But Duke isn't a fighter anymore," Will continued with conviction. "He's going to be something this town has never seen before." Will pulled out a small silver badge from his pocket carefully. It was a deputy's badge he had specially made for this. "Duke is going to be my deputy," Will announced to shocked faces. "The first canine law enforcement officer in Nevada territory." The crowd erupted with protests and concerns immediately and loudly. "You can't make a fighting dog a deputy," someone yelled. "He'll attack innocent people," another person shouted with fear. But Will raised his hand for silence and got it. "Watch," Will said simply to the skeptical crowd around them. He gave Duke a series of commands in front of everyone. Duke obeyed each one perfectly without hesitation or aggression showing. Sit, stay, come, heel, down. The crowd watched in amazement. Then Will did something even more dramatic to prove his point. He asked a young boy to come forward from the crowd. The boy's mother hesitated, but Will smiled reassuringly at her. "Trust me," he said gently to both of them. The boy walked forward nervously toward Duke and Will together. "Duke, gentle," Will commanded softly but clearly to the dog. Duke sat down and lowered his head in a submissive, friendly position. The boy reached out slowly and touched Duke's scarred head carefully. Duke's tail wagged gently, and he licked the boy's small hand. The crowd gasped in surprise at this gentle interaction happening. The boy laughed and petted Duke more confidently now, without fear. "See?" Will said to the gathered crowd watching closely. "Duke isn't dangerous anymore. He's protective, loyal, and brave." Over the next months, Duke proved himself repeatedly to the entire town. He helped Will track down escaped prisoners through rough terrain successfully. He protected children from dangerous animals with courage and skill. He stood guard at the jail, preventing 2 attempted jailbreaks easily. Duke could smell trouble before it started and alert Will immediately. His fighting instincts had been transformed into protective law enforcement skills. The town that once feared him now loved and respected him. Children played with Duke in the streets without any fear. Duke was gentle with everyone, especially the most vulnerable citizens. Rachel at the Lucky Star kept treats behind the bar for Duke. "Who would have thought?" she said to Will one day. The most feared fighting dog became the town's most beloved deputy. Will smiled while petting Duke's head affectionately and proudly. "Everyone deserves a second chance," he said. "Duke just needed someone to believe in him first."
Duke wore his small silver deputy badge on a leather collar. He had become a symbol of redemption and transformation for everyone.
1 year after Duke became a deputy, something remarkable happened in town. A group of bandits tried to rob the bank on Main Street. Will and Duke responded to the alarm bells ringing loudly. The bandits had hostages inside and were heavily armed with guns. Will assessed the situation carefully from outside the bank building. "Duke, I need you to go in there," he said quietly. "Find a way to help those people safely." Duke looked at Will with those intelligent amber eyes, understanding completely. This was what all the training had been for, exactly. Duke moved silently around to the back entrance of the bank. He slipped inside through a broken window without making noise. Inside, 3 bandits held 5 hostages at gunpoint nervously. Duke watched from the shadows, calculating his approach carefully and precisely. When one bandit separated from the group momentarily alone, Duke acted. He lunged silently and took the bandit down without injury. The other bandits turned in surprise, giving Will the opening needed. Will burst through the front door with his gun drawn. The remaining bandits surrendered immediately, seeing they were surrounded now. Duke stood guard over the captured bandits until backup arrived. Not one person was injured in the entire rescue operation. The town celebrated Duke as a genuine hero that day. The scarred fighting dog had saved lives, using his strength differently. Will knelt beside Duke and hugged him tightly with pride. "You did it, boy," he said with emotion in his voice. "You proved everyone wrong about who you really are inside." Duke's tail wagged with pure happiness and purpose found finally. He had found his true calling, protecting people instead of hurting them. The transformation was complete, from fighter to hero and protector. And in the golden sunset over Copper Ridge that evening, Duke sat proudly beside Will on the sheriff's office porch peacefully. His deputy badge gleamed in the fading light beautifully. The scars remained on his body as reminders of his past. But his eyes now showed something completely different than before. Not sadness or rage or resignation to violence anymore, but peace, purpose, and the quiet dignity of a life redeemed. Duke had become living proof that no soul is beyond saving, that second chances can transform even the most broken spirits, and that sometimes the most unlikely heroes make the greatest difference. The fighting dog had become the lawman's most trusted deputy, and together they made Copper Ridge a better and safer place. Justice had been served in the most unexpected way possible. On 4 legs, wearing a badge, with a heart bigger than anyone. Duke had found his purpose and his peace at last.